So each Sunday, in addition to our scripture reading, I have a non-biblical reading, recognizing that God does not stop speaking, and that there are many places where we sense that God's Spirit is also moving, and that there is wisdom and insight for us to gain. So this is a book called The Rebirthing of God by John Philip Newell. And in it, he talks about Simone Weil. So let me read you this excerpt. One of the great prophets of love in the modern world was Simone Weil, who lived from 1909 to 1943, actually not a very long life. She's described by her contemporaries as, quote, the only great spirit of our times. She was a philosopher, a mystic, and a political activist. As a French Jew, she saw the Nazi occupation of her homeland, fleeing Paris on June 13, 1940, only hours before German forces laid siege to the capital. Eventually, she set sail from the south of France to find exile in the United States and then Britain. Weil believed that the universe is essentially a vibration of God. Drawing on her Jewish inheritance, she saw everything as spoken into being by God. At the heart of that divine utterance is the sound or vibration of love. The universe is an expression of love, and everything in the universe is essentially a means to love. The rising sun is a means to love, as is the whiteness of the moon at night, every life form, the shape of the weeping willow by the distant pond, the song of the robin in the hedgerow, the light in the eyes of every creature. All these are means to love. I am a means to love. You are a means to love, as are your children and your nation.
This is why I kneel before Abba God, from whom every family in heaven and on earth takes its name. And I pray that God, out of the riches of divine glory, will strengthen you inwardly with power through the working of the Spirit. May Christ dwell in your hearts through faith, so that you, being rooted and grounded in love, will be able to grasp fully the breadth, length, height, and depth of Christ's love, and, with all God's holy ones, experience this love that surpasses all understanding, so that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. To God, whose power now at work in us can do immeasurably more than we ask or imagine.
Would you pray with me? Divine essence. Love is a difficult thing to explain, to understand, to fully grasp. And yet we're here trying, as we try often. Let your Spirit lead and guide us in this conversation, that we might grasp a little bit what Paul was talking about, and that we might be filled with the fullness of your essence. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be filled with your wisdom and your insight. Amen. Okay, you are the lucky ones today, because you are the only ones who are going to get, well, of course we're on video, but get my one of my most embarrassing childhood memories. Okay? So when I was probably, I'm going to say 9, 10-ish, a friend and I had crushes on these two boys. Right? And now this is back, I grew up in Brookfield. So how many of you remember Mayfair Mall having an ice skating rink? Way back in the day. I loved ice skating. I had my little red ice skating dress with my little skirt and my own ice skates. And we agreed, there was open skating, so we agreed to meet these two boys for open skating. And one of the things that happens during open skating is the couples skate, right? So we completely embarrassed and totally giddy. I can remember this. It embarrasses me as I think about it. But my friend and I went up to the DJ's box to request a song for the couples skate. Want to guess what song we requested?
Danger Zone.
How Deep Is Your Love by the Bee Gees. How deep is your love? I really need to hear. 'Cause we're living in a world of fools, breaking us down till I don't know. Till they all you belong to you and me. Na 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 da da da. Okay, so completely embarrassed, right? Okay, I tell you this story because this is not the type of love we are talking about today. Classic example of not the type of love. We're talking about divine love. Okay, so what else is, sometimes it helps to define something by defining what it's not. So what else is divine love not? It's not angry. It's not selfish. It's not jealous. It's not hateful. We use the word love in a lot of instances. Is there a way that we use it that is not divine love?
Love you, man.
Love you, man. Sexual love.
Love that car.
Love that car. I love what you've done to your hair. I love my ice cream. Sure, even, and I started thinking about this is kind of difficult, but I'm not even convinced that our love for our partners and our children is divine love. At least not consistently. I think all of those things, as Simone Weil says, are a means to love and a means to divine love, and that there are moments when our love is pure enough and deep enough that we touch that divine love in our loving of others. But by and large, our loving in our relationships, unfortunately, probably often falls short of that, no matter how much we don't want it to. This whole passage from Paul says to us that it's really hard, and yet it's his fervent plea and hope and prayer that we could grasp the height and depth and length and breadth of God's love for us. And Paul and I don't usually get along, but I really like this passage because he really wants us to get it. He wants us to know to the very core of our beings. He wants us to be rooted and grounded in how immense God's love is, so that we can experience a love that surpasses understanding and we can be filled with the fullness of God. So I get the irony of the fact that I'm standing here trying to explain something that surpasses understanding. But as it often is with God and with spirituality, we're trying to describe things that are indescribable, that are ineffable, where our language continues to fall short of what we're trying to describe. You know, I looked and looked for a secondary source describing God's love. And I found a lot of people talking about God's love, but trying to actually describe what it is something completely different. I finally came up with this passage from Simone Weil because she talks about the universe being a vibration of love. And I thought, well, metaphorically, we don't get much bigger than the universe. And so if all of that is a vibration of love, and God is love, then that's huge. I can't personally grasp the universe. Can you? The infinite nature of the universe? No. And so we can't really fully grasp the infinite nature of God's love. So given our lack of language for all of this, and we've described what God's love is not, how would we describe what divine love is? We can intellectualize it. What does it look like? Anyway. Open. Constant. Forgiving. Expansive. Warm. All-inclusive. Non-judgmental. Unconditional. Immeasurable. That energy in us that prompts us to do good even in the face of hopelessness, despair, or great evil. Something that when it touches us, fills us with the fullness of God. So in every cell of our being, we will vibrate with that power of that love. I actually think Paul did a really good job in 1 Corinthians 13, which we always use as the wedding verse, right? Now we've turned it into human love. But Paul was describing God's love. His love is patient, and love is kind, and love is generous, and it's not arrogant or boastful or envious or rude. It forgives all things, and believes all things, and hopes all things, and endures all things. That's the divine love. The struggle, perhaps, with all of this is that as humans unable to fully grasp what that's like, we have taken human love and equated it to God, except maybe at a slightly higher level. But we've done a really good job of creating God in the human image, instead of trying to remember that our souls are created in the image of God. And so God becomes this being with a human type of love that is not a lot of those things that we've talked about. And the church, the traditional church by and large, does not talk about a God that shows the kind of love that we just talked about. Because by and large, the traditional church talks about a God that we should fear. And a God whose being is not full of that unconditional, all-inclusive love. And our churches have developed doctrine that is not about an unconditional, all-inclusive love. And so how then are we supposed to grasp this immense divine love? I was talking to a friend of mine this last week who just recently moved to Texas. And she's a teacher, and she was applying for jobs. And she applied to a Christian school. She got an interview, and she went in to meet with the principal. And the principal informed her that if she became a teacher there, she was going to have to learn how to spank the children. And he would be happy to teach her how to do that. Yeah, pretty much made me sick to the very core of my being. And this is a Christian school who's supposed to be about the immense, unconditional, all-inclusive love of God. There's a real disconnect there. So often the church has taught a God of vengeance and punishment. The core doctrine of Jesus Christ died for my sins means that God requires a human sacrifice. A beautiful person has to be tortured and killed just for the rest of us. That's ridiculous. And not the kind of God who has an immense capability for forgiveness and for love. Our doctrine that says do X, Y, and Z and then you'll get to heaven is conditional love. Do X, Y, and Z and you'll be rewarded is conditional love, not unconditional love. The churches that say, well, you're much better off if you're a man and you're a heterosexual is conditional love. Over and over again, the church has given us examples of things that have nothing to do with divine love. And so how are we supposed to grasp what Paul's talking about? What Simone Weil's talking about, that vibration of love that fills us. Author and Quaker pastor Philip Gulley tells a story about how he learned to stop using fear as a ministry tool. He said it came home to him when he went to a youth rally with a very popular evangelist. He said, there was rock music and there was a slideshow and the kids were batting balloons back and forth, and it was very different from the youth rallies that he remembered from his youth. He said, but the message was the same. The evangelist stood up and talked about sin and death and put the fear of God into these kids, and then talked about Jesus and Jesus' love, and then went back to threatening the kids and saying, if you aren't completely convinced that you're going to be in heaven for eternity, if you have any doubt in you as to where you're going to be when you die, then you need to come up here to this altar and you need to confess Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior. He said, well, after all that, he said, hundreds flocked up to the altar. He said he noticed one thing. He said, and the kids that they brought, said the kids who went forward were primarily from families that were negligent or abusive. And the kids that stayed behind were from families that were loving and caring. And he realized in that moment how manipulative the church could be about God's love. And he recognized how the church preys on people who are insecure and anxious. He said he read a report later that 400 youth had gone forward to give their lives to Christ. He said, but he wondered if what really had happened was that 400 vulnerable and broken youth had learned to fear God. So how do we get past all of that? There's so much unworthiness that I think we feel as human beings, and that we've been taught to feel as human beings from our parents and our teachers and our churches. And when we feel unworthy, what do? We close off and protect ourselves, right? We defend ourselves. And yet to experience this love of God, we need to open. And we need to recognize that it's for each of us, that for God, it's not about deserving. It's not about being worthy. You are loved no matter what. So we can intellectualize it all day, but to feel it, we have to open up and know that it's already in us and around us and everywhere, that vibration of love in the universe. That you are worthy and you are beautiful in God's eyes. We need touchstones to know what it feels like so that we learn to look for it and feel it more. For example, how many of you were moved by the 11 youth and the soccer coach that were trapped in the caves in Thailand? I mean, were we not all wondering every day, did they get out? Did they get out? We're, feeling as a parent, oh my gosh, those poor kids. How would you feel if your child were trapped in a cave? And feeling compassion for the kids and the fear and the anxiety of being in that cave, and the workers who were trying to save them for so long, and the one person who died in the process of it. Now, these are people halfway across the world that we don't know. And yet the compassion and the caring that we felt for that, it's sort of a little glimpse into that divine love. Being able to love without judging, loving somebody we don't know, wanting only the best for those people. A little glimpse for a moment into the breadth and length and width and height of God's love. where's the most amazing place you've been nature-wise, where you felt the immensity of the universe, the vibration of love in the universe. Maybe you couldn't name it as that. Maybe it was just awe and beauty, but you wanted to sit and you wanted to stay and you wanted to absorb it all in. There was a serenity and a peace that was exuded from that place that you could probably feel. Am I making sense, or are you all? Have you had that experience? Because that's feeling the vibration of love in the universe. That's touching divine love, if for just a moment. Those are the kinds of experiences that, if we can recognize it and open to it, we can then feel it more, I think. It's like, I used to have a yellow Jeep, and I didn't realize how many yellow Jeeps were in town until I had one. And you're like, wow, there's yellow Jeeps everywhere. So if you can go, oh, I felt the immense love of God in this moment, then suddenly you can recognize the immense love of God in all kinds of different moments. And perhaps the more you feel it, the more it will also flow from us. At least that's my working theory, okay? So I invite you to know in this moment, believe it for me, if you can't believe it yourself, because I firmly believe it about all of you, that you're beautiful and you are loved and you're worthy of divine love. Open to it. Watch for it. Take it in. Even if it's beyond understanding, take it in so that you can be filled with the fullness of God. Amen.